Today's topic is one that I have not talked much about before, and it's not an easy one. It's all about fertility.
I'm Cameron. I spent years building my career and creating a life I loved. And when my Prince Charming finally showed up, he had 4 kids in tow. Fast forward through lots of mistakes made and lessons learned, step family life was much more complicated than I realized. If you're looking for help with blended family life, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stepmom Diaries, where we keep it real as we dish about all the things. This is your weekly dose of blended family inspiration and encouragement. You're not the wicked stepmother, so let me help you find your fairy tale ending. Come on, let's do this. Hello,
welcome. Today's topic is one that I wanted to tackle because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it over the years. And if I'm being honest, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand it for myself and, honestly trying to coach myself on. This is a trigger warning for anyone struggling with fertility issues. We're going to get into all of that today. And I think this is something that actually a lot of stepmoms struggle with. And these are the challenges around fertility and being a childless stepmom. Before we start, though, I want to ask you a favor. Could you take just a second and head over to iTunes and give me a review for the podcast? All you have to do is give me 5 stars and write in what you like best about the podcast. It'll help other stepmoms find me. And the best part is, if you send me a screenshot of your review, I am going to send you my 20-minute stepmom self-care blueprint for free. This is normally $49, and it's a fantastic tool to quickly set up a self-care plan that you will actually use. So all you have to do is head to thiscustomlife.com/podcast review. Don't worry, I will put a link in the show notes, which, as usual, the usual formula you can find at thiscustomlife.com/episode 71. So let's get started. I am what is known as a childless stepmom. You may have heard this term before, but what it means is I did not come into our step family with my own kids, and we didn't have any kids of our own, my husband and I. Childless stepmoms can be by choice or by circumstance. Either way, it can be really difficult. And today, I want to talk about being childless by circumstance, meaning not because you chose to be, not because you didn't want kids. And for me, what that looks like is, I always thought I would have kids. I grew up in the South, where the normal pattern of life is to go to school, get married, and have babies. My path did diverge from a lot of my college friends when I went to law school and decided to move to DC to work in politics. But I was in more weddings than I can count. I loved oohing and eyeing over all of my friends' precious new babies. And I never really thought about the fact that I didn't have kids. I just sort of figured I would get to it when I met my person. Well, fast forward, and after a number of years in DC, I kept not meeting my person. And when I turned 40, I actually realized, and I got a little bit of a sinking pit in my stomach whenever I thought about it. I realized I might not actually have kids, that part of my life might be closed off to me. I had dated, but I hadn't found my person yet. And, I was still having fun. I mean, my career was really successful. I was making great money. And I was using it to spend time with friends and travel all over the world, like literally. I've been to Antarctica. I've gone diving with sharks in South Africa. I've climbed Kilimanjaro. I've been to Japan, China, Turkey, you name it. It was a great life. And part of me kind of couldn't imagine being tied down, but part of me really didn't want to miss that family part of life. Now, I could have gone and frozen my eggs or gotten a sperm donor and had kids on my own. I absolutely could have. The thought crossed my mind a few times. I had friends that went that route because for them, having a child was the most important part of life. That's all they wanted. But I was a little different. For me, the most important thing was finding my person. I figured kids would happen after that, and I kind of took that part for granted. My priority was always to find my person. I wanted to be in love, and I wanted to be loved for the rest of my life. The end, you know? But there I was, 40, and my person hadn't shown up yet. And I started to wonder, did I mess up my life because I had chased my career and having adventures before I settled down? I put that thought aside. I started putting myself out there a little bit more, and my person showed up. And that was Craig, my husband. We both knew almost immediately that this was it for both of us. This was the one. And he came with 4 kids. We got married pretty quickly after we met, in part because we both wanted to try for a baby. And we knew it might be tricky with my age, but we both wanted a baby. And yes, that would have been his 5th. I couldn't believe that he was willing to, but I was excited. So we realized also pretty quickly that IVF was going to be our best chance. So we got to work, and I approached it kind of like I have approached everything else in my life. I studied, I followed instructions, I talked to doctors. And when we got into the process, I gave myself the shots. Craig gave me shots, and we monitored. I had procedures, and we waited. And this went on. 5 rounds of shots, 5 rounds of egg retrieval procedures. And these procedures require time off work, more shots, more waiting. If you have been through this, you know how awful a round of IVF can be on your body, let alone 5, which is what I went through. And we hadn't told a ton of people we were doing this, even our families. Some of them are going to hear it for the first time on this podcast. I am still not sure that we've told them all of this. So, and we hadn't told the kids either. And that made it even more challenging because here we are, we're trying to navigate our first year of marriage, integrating me into the family, trying for a baby. And we were having a ton of challenges all the way around. One of my stepkids has special needs, and that was challenging. We both had busy full-time jobs. I was barely holding it together that first year. I was super stressed. I felt like I was constantly under pressure as a new stepmom. And honestly, as we tried to get some damn eggs to fertilize, my hormones were going nuts, and so was I. It was insane. And looking back on it, I'm honestly not sure how Craig and I made it through that first year, but we did. And all of this was happening after the 5th round. We had the meeting with the doctor that we had been dreading. And she said, look, you're still making eggs. We can keep trying this. We can do IVF, 5 more times, 10 more times. But the fact is, your eggs are not young. And your best shot is to find a donor egg. And ultimately, that became the end of the road for us. By that point, I was, I think, around 43. And I was right on the edge of where I wanted to be age-wise if I was going to have a baby. I really didn't want to be having a baby after 45 or so. And it was a really difficult choice. I don't know. I think we talk about it sometimes and wonder if we did the right thing by stopping. I think we did. All we can do, and this is what we talk about a lot, is make the best decisions we have with the information we have on hand at that particular moment in time, And I've also always believed in signs and in God. And I felt like maybe this fertility journey was God telling me that I had enough on my plate, that we had enough on our plate without adding a baby into the mix. And in retrospect, I don't know how we would have done with a newborn, with everything that we went through with our family the first couple of years. But it was a hard pill to swallow. It really was. The good thing is that we were so busy with 4 kids and school and work that we kind of just moved on. Until one day I was driving with my stepdaughter, who was 14 at the time, and we were talking about a friend of mine that had had a baby. And she asked me kind of out of the blue if it was hard to see my friends have kids when I didn't have any of my own. What a question. What a question. And what a question for a 14-year-old, how sensitive. And, I mean, it was, it kind of threw me for a loop. How did I answer it? I mean, I was honest with her. The answer to that question is yes. It's really hard to see friends having kids when you always figured you'd have your own and it doesn't happen. And I told her that. I told her we had tried. I didn't get into the details. I didn't tell her how hard we tried, but I told her that yes, her dad and I had wanted a child, but that God had other plans and that I had come to peace with it, which was mostly true, not totally. But that does bring me to what I want to talk about today, which is that being a childless stepmom by circumstance can be really tricky. If you're a happily childless stepmom, you can still struggle with the stigma around being childless. And if you wanted your own kids, you may also be struggling with the extra feelings when you're around your stepkids or your friends' kids. And I got to be honest, when you hear that, you're not my mom, which I think most of us stepmoms have heard at some point or another, it rings a little different if you haven't been able to have your own kids. And every rejection from the kids, from the ex, whether it's perceived or real, just hits a little different. It's really easy also for you to unknowingly put pressure on your relationships with your stepkids when you had wanted your own kids, because all of a sudden, these become the only kids you'll ever have. So you want those relationships to work. Is any of that ringing true for you? If it is, I hear you because I have been there. So I thought today maybe I would go through some of the challenges that stepmoms who are struggling with infertility have to deal with and a few simple coping strategies. This is not going to cover everything. That would take several other podcast episodes, but we're going to go through a few things. All right, the first one I'm only going to talk about briefly because I really want to spend more of this time talking about the emotional stuff. But, the first challenge is obviously financial. It's real. The financial struggle is real. IVF can cost thousands upon thousands of dollars every round. And if you decide to go the donor egg or the surrogacy route, that's even more. And that is something that you really do have to struggle with and have lots of hard conversations with your partner and, thinking about it on your own. But let's move on. We're going to talk more about the emotional stuff today. So the second challenge is when the time comes that you need to make a decision whether you're going to stop trying or not. And this is a huge weight for any couple. But a stepmom does feel it differently. It's an enormous loss. And it can also be hard to figure out when the time has come to stop trying. For us, it was sort of a clear line. We knew that going the donor egg route would be that much of a bigger, harder ordeal. And that was kind of the line that we drew. It's different for everybody, and there's no right answer. But you do have to ask yourself some really key questions when you're trying to figure it out. And, the hard thing is that I can't tell you, nor can anyone else tell you when the right time is to make that call. You and your spouse are really the only ones who can decide that. For us, and I don't necessarily recommend that you do it our way or not, just to share our journey. We left that doctor's appointment when she told us donor eggs were really the only option. And we talked about it for a few minutes. I think we had kind of both maybe realized that conversation was going to come at some point. I don't know that either of us expected it that day. But we talked about it for a little bit, and then we stopped talking about it. For several months, neither of us brought it up. And I think neither of us wanted to be the one to officially kill the dream. So we just didn't. I think we both knew that we weren't going to go any further. We just didn't talk about it. I don't remember which one of us finally mentioned it, but the question really was, by that point, Had we made a decision by not really making a decision? And kind of, yeah. When we finally talked about it, we decided together that it just didn't feel right for us to keep going. And we decided that we were going to be enough along with Craig's kids. I don't know that I recommend that anyone else do what we did. I generally think that communicating and talking is always the best route. I don't think you should let indecision be the decider. But ultimately, when we did talk about it, we were both on the same page, and that's what's important. If you're not on the same page, you need to talk about it until you are. And you need to both feel right about the decision. And these are just really hard things, right? Okay, so let's talk about the third thing. And this is dealing with all of the emotions around when you make that decision to stop trying. Understand that this loss, even though there wasn't, necessarily a baby or a pregnancy to officially lose, it is a loss and it doesn't just go away. And your grieving isn't just going to go away. So I want to talk to you about a couple of things to think through as you're going through this grieving process. And, who are you without kids, right? Think about what you want your life to look like. It was kind of hard for us because I already knew who I was without kids because I hadn't had them. And I met Craig a little bit later in life than, a lot of my friends had met their spouses. But who was I going to be with Craig and with the stepkids without having my own child? Did that make me less of a woman? And I had to really think that through. The answer is no, it does not make me less than a woman. And it doesn't make me less of a stepmom, doesn't make me less of a person or less of a wife. It just makes me someone who doesn't have my own biological kids. I think when you're thinking about all this and when you're doing the grieving, what does that grief look like? Well, it's different for everyone who's experienced this. For me, it hits at weird times. It didn't hit me immediately. It hit me sort of sporadically in the months and years afterwards. I was maybe 6 months after the fact, and I was with a couple of my friends who are moms, and they were talking about the feeling of giving birth and bonding with their kids, and that there was nothing like that in the world. And I just felt my stomach lurch because I thought, I'm never going to have that. That's what the grief kind of looks like. Most recently, I was flying with Craig and my stepdaughter when we took her to college, and we were seated separately. So I didn't see them during the flight. But when we were getting off the plane, I noticed that Craig was talking to a woman who had a baby. And he told me that the baby had been fussy and he had helped calm them down. And he said, I'm good with babies. I could always calm the kids down when they were little. And I felt my stomach lurch again. And I looked away because my eyes started to well up. I'd never get to experience that with him or for myself. Here's the thing. You may always grieve not having your own child, but you need to acknowledge the feeling, let yourself feel it, and then move on. And it's really hard to do, especially when you're in the moment and you're walking off a plane and, have to put your game face on for college move-in. But, what I would also say is try to flip that grief on its head when you can. The same thing that you would about other things, right? I've talked before on the podcast about grieving your expectations around being a stepmom. How you need to feel all the feels, how you need to acknowledge them before you can move on. And when you grieve not having your own child, try to think about, flip it on its head and think about what it is you love about your life, what it is that you're grateful for. And that helps you move on from the grief. So when we were walking off that plane, I thought about how lucky I was to be there with my stepdaughter, moving her into college, and, how much she had ahead of her. And it made me really happy. It made me really happy to think about my life and that I got to experience this with her. And it helped me move through that minute where my stomach clenched up and I thought, I'm not ever going to have that. I'm going to add a number 4 in here. And it's one that I talk about a lot. and it's communication. These emotions run deeper than you can imagine. They really do. And if you're going through this right now, you know exactly what I mean. And please know that I understand the pain. You and your partner, though, are going to have very different emotions around it. Your spouse is going to experience the disappointment around not expanding your family for sure. But they've already had their own kids. You're dealing with a totally different set of emotions and a totally different sense of loss. I didn't say that you're dealing with a sense of loss that is deeper or worse. I said different because I don't want you to take on the feeling that like nobody, including my partner, can ever understand me. Because the fact is they're grieving too, because they may have other kids, but they wanted one with you. And they may feel guilty or sad for you that the dream is over, that they couldn't give that to you. Take it day by day. If you need to be sad, be sad. If you need to cry, cry. But make sure your spouse knows that you're feeling all the feelings. Make sure your spouse knows where you are in terms of, it's hitting me hard today. I need a little space because it's hitting me hard. But talk to your spouse about what it is you need from them when those feelings are coming on. Talk about what you need from each other. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, you signed on for life with your partner. So I want you to lean on them and make sure they know they can lean on you, right? This is hard stuff, but you have to be able to communicate with your spouse. You have to. Whew. Okay, we covered a lot today. So, if this episode resonated with you, I'd love to ask you again to do me a favor and head over to iTunes and give me a review. And if you send me a screenshot, I'm going to send you my 20-minute stepmom self-care blueprint, which, especially if you're going through all this, will really help you take a minute and breathe and put together a plan to take care of yourself, a plan that you'll actually implement. It's normally $49. I'm going to give it to you for free if you head on over and leave me a review and send me a screenshot of it. I'm going to put it in the show notes at thiscustomlife.com/episode 71. So you can head over there to find all the things. And thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.
That's it for this week. If you've enjoyed our chat, I hope you'll help spread the word. Share this episode with friends and head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review. And don't forget, for more great stepmom content, head on over to thiscustomlife.com and follow me on social media. Just search This Custom Life on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Until next time, you keep being you and know that we are in this together. See you here next week.